Eduardo, do you want me to start? Doug?
Yeah, sure. So we're on to our next session now as folks kind of filter back in, and we're going to talk about field exercises to courses, how to make the virtual real. And Dan Rubenstein, would you like to start for us?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Rubenstein. I'm a behavioral ecologist and I'm at Princeton University. And I'm going to share my screen. And I hope everyone can see it. So, as Doug said, I'm going to talk about field exercises, doing them online, on making the virtual real. And the reason for this is that we often think about studying animals in person. We watch them, we do ethograms, we do experiments with them, but we often use technology to be able to do what we do. We videotape them, we do film analysis, we do a host of things with technology. But once we were in the pandemic, we had to live with the technology and try to reconstruct reality. And so the pixels now become the driver as we try to make inferences about real organisms. And so that's where I'm going to start. Now, for me, the dilemma was really simple. I was on my way to Kenya. I teach a field course. We have a series of courses that are each 3 weeks long. It's total immersion. And I was flying out during spring break to start module number 3 week course, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. And we started to get word that the coronavirus was spreading. And the weekend that President Trump brought everybody back was the weekend that we brought our students back. I was due to fly out on the 13th of March, indirectly through Frankfurt. Germany was exploding. I changed my flight to be the direct flight going to Nairobi. I got cold feet because I would have been turned back. As soon as I got there, they shut the country down. So all of a sudden, I had to teach a field course with students not even on campus, but distributed back home. And home meant all the way from California to London. So I had time distances to deal with as well. And this is a course that's going to be, in theory, 10 hours a day. So that was the dilemma. So how then do you teach an intensive 6 day a week, 10-hour per day field course online with dispersed students across the US and in fact across the world? Fortunately, I didn't have anybody in Singapore. Otherwise, they would have had, as Doug said, a less than equitable solution because they would have had to watch it online as opposed to actually having me talk and they could interrupt me with questions. Okay. So we had to teach the course virtually, of course, but how do you do it? Especially when the title of my course is The Natural History of Mammals, which is really a behavioral ecology field course, using the most charismatic megafauna that you can possibly imagine. All of my practical exercises are on giraffes, on elephants, on zebras that I studied. And the latter two are all marked, so you don't even have to mark them. Nature gives you a natural barcode, so you can look at individuality, which is at the core of behavioral ecology. And so, how do you do it? The first thing to do when you're starting to think about making experiments and teaching field courses online is you really have to know what your goals are. So you have to stand back and say, what is it that I am teaching? And we heard, for example, from Dwayne, that maybe our lectures are too full. Maybe I don't cover enough material. So you need to understand really what you want out of the course for your students. So for me, it's an experiential learning course. I do have lectures. We do have discussion groups. We do have presentations on particular species and their creative behavior. And I provide all the material. There's no textbook. I take articles with me. I have a collection, online PDFs. And of course, we have the internet in the field, so we can upload new stuff as well. So if it's experiential, what experience do I want them to have? The first is I want them to see what animals really do. The essence of animal behavior is finding pattern. And so I ask them to do that. Then they have to learn how to describe that pattern, both verbally and quantitatively. So it's good to have a field notebook, but how are you going to abstract what you're seeing into numbers so you can do analyses to test hypotheses? Because my next goal is to have them propose a cause for the pattern and explain it by asking a why question. Then comes the easy part. They've been doing this in school since they were in fourth grade. answering a question is design an experiment, get data, do some sort of analysis, and do a presentation. But if it's their question, it's not a cookbook. And so this is why if they find a pattern and they have to dive into it on something that really intrigues them, they're going to own it. And then, of course, they have to share the results, either as a talk, a paper, to me and themselves, but we work on other people's lands. We work on conservancies where the owner and the chief scientist want to come to hear what we've learned about the species in their landscape. And so they're listening as well. Pretty heady experience for 20-year-olds to be able to talk to managers about what they're doing that needs a change. So now you have to understand the challenges. In my case, it was everyone was scattered, so group learning had to be solo. Now that seems like an oxymoron, but it's not. We're going to see that the real thing that I learned was that by working alone, they took ownership of their own data, but they collectively had to integrate it with the own data of others. And that's something that we tend not to do when we're doing face-to-face learning, because we let them work in groups. And one of the things that happens with groups is you get leaders that bamboozle and bully people. And the wallflowers don't always ask the right questions, even though they have strong opinions. So I learned something by working solo. And no two students will be in the same situation. We've already heard the comment, at least in my group, with the cats walking by. The students really like to see the cats and the little baby brothers and sisters, but they sometimes embarrassed by that. I know that when I was giving my course, the students told me at the end that their parents were sitting there listening and participating, but not on camera. They were embarrassed by that, but they couldn't stop their parents from joining in. So everybody has different personal issues, and Doug talked about that. Not everyone has good internet. Some of my students had to go, classroom became their minivan, because in their small town in the Adirondacks in New York, the internet on the phone was so bad that the high school left its internet on, and the whole town moved into the parking lot to do their internet. Okay, so everybody is in a different space. And no longer do they have a common field experiment. The semi-natural world, because Central Park is not the same as upstate Michigan, is different. How do you deal with all of that? And that's really the key. The labs that you develop have to have personal ownership, but you have to be able to stand back and anticipate that you've got apple and orange comparisons coming in, and how are you going to mediate that? Okay, so can the students and experience be brought together? Obviously, the answer is yes, but it requires creating collective experiences virtually. And so Doug talked about that with the lecture. I'm going to talk about that with the lab practical. Where to begin? Reverse design. If there's anything I can teach you today is know what you want to accomplish and work backwards. That's what the goal setting was. Know what your impediments are, the bumps in the road that you're going to have to try to navigate, because there's going to be surprises that you hadn't anticipated. At least the ones you anticipate, you might be able to get over those humps. So my take-home message today is do less to get more. So stand back and let the students act, let the students take ownership of their own learning. I'm not a proponent of teaching as I am about students learning. I will give lectures, and my lectures will have punctuation points more so online than I do in class. Because when I'm motoring along, they don't raise their hand and stop me as often as I probably should. But in class, I've learned, and we talked about this in our breakout group, to use poll everywhere. I can put those questions right in lecture, and then they will give their answers on their smartphone, and then the results will come up. It can be a Wordle, so I get a sense and a flavor of what they're thinking about. It can be A, B, C, D, E, and they vote on it, whatever. There's a whole series of really cool things in Poll Everywhere. It's free if you only accept the first 40 answers. So this 41st student doesn't get recorded. That's okay. Okay, so the first thing was I wanted them to see what animals do. I call that the seeing. And I've always played in the field a quiz show game, Is It So? And under this presidency, I've changed it to real news or fake news. And I usually work with dik-diks because they're habituated to the campus, so you can walk up and watch them. They're the smallest ungulate. They're about this tall. Well, what am I going to use for my organisms for the quiz show? The gray squirrel, or the fox squirrel, or the chipmunk. This gets to the differences in the worlds that the students have. And they could choose one of those. I broke them down into teams. And because my course, we have field programs both in Kenya and in Panama, I got all the Panama students who couldn't take coral reef biology to take my behavior course. So I had 30 students, and I broke them into two teams, the Panama students and the Kenya students. Panama students put the Panama flag behind them as their virtual background. They were a really bonded group. They were really played a very interesting game. And you basically play the game by doing this. Everybody will watch the animals. So since natural history is the close observation of organisms, their origins, their evolution, their behavior, and the relationship with other species, you will do just this for the next 3 days, Monday afternoon through Wednesday afternoon. You will watch squirrels in your backyards or nearby open areas that you can visit solo because you had to socially distance, parks, cemetery, railway cuts, etc., and absorb all they do alone or with other squirrels, as well as where and when they do it. Test ideas if you want, because in Kenya we can move dung around from the territories and stuff. You have to do your how and why. Just perform simple, non-invasive experiments and don't stress the animals. Now, this is the key. You will work in teams, even though you're getting data alone, and you'll present your findings Wednesday night on the quiz show. Real news or fake news? Will the real squirrel reveal itself? Each team will present factoids and an explanation about them. And if unchallenged by the other team and the factoid stands, then it earns 1 point for the first team, but 2 points for the second team, because all the low-hanging fruit is taken by the first team. Often the second team wins. And the Kenya field semester students will comprise one team and the Panama will comprise the other. And they get into it. You're going to make a game as opposed to a simulation. It's got to be competitive. And they worked so hard on it. Okay, they had their own Zoom, they set up their own Zoom meetings, they were planning, they had pictures to prove that their points were real. I was really impressed at how seriously they took it, even more so than when it's done live. Okay, they sit around and they organize it, but this forced them to really contribute as co-equals to the class. So that's the seeing. Next is the describing, and this is the time budget. I wanted them to learn how to quantify behavior. So it's not quite an ethogram that you just list things, but it's actually doing an ethogram and then figuring out how much time they do things. And the key is watch a boring video. Now, it's hard to find a boring video on animal behavior because we tend in animal behavior to show males fighting, females displaying, we show sex, we show predators eating, we show active things. You don't get time budgets on active things like that. Most animals are just doing. So I've got a clip here of the movie I found, and I hope it works. David Attenborough, it's not.
We are not seeing the...
You can't see it?
No.
Oh, okay.
I think maybe you need to switch. Do you have 2 screens?
I don't have 2 screens.
I think you need to share. If you may have just shared the presentation. If you share your screen, I think.
Oh, I see. Okay, let me go out and do that. Okay, hold on. I can do that. Okay, stop sharing. Go back to the screen. All right. Let me. Okay, here we go. Yeah, it just keeps going because it's kind of boring. Okay, can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so, this is what zebras do. And it's really easy to do instantaneous scan sampling, focal animal sampling, talking about the differences. You can see the lunch pack of the male, so you can identify the male. You have stripes, so you can look at individuals. You can mothers and young, and females without youngsters. It's open-ended. And we teach them the basics, and they go about looking at what the animals do. And then we have great discussions about it. See if I can get back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so then, you know what? I'm gonna have to turn that off because it's gonna eventually, the YouTube will end and someone will start speaking. So let me see if I can do that. Okay. So that's the time budget side. And it works out great because they take ownership of it. And each group talks about it. They come up with their own story, and different people see things differently. That's the take-home message. And that's really, really important. And lastly is the key to science: question posing, problem solving. And this is where I took the labs I did for my students, and I also taught a teacher workshop this summer about risk. And so coping with risk, what animals can teach people, was the theme of the course. You can see here, it's about the life dinner principle. It's about trade-offs, that I have to eat, but I have to stay alive. And so I'm eating a little fish and a bigger fish is going to eat me. But as we well know with trade-offs, collective action can sometimes either dilute out the risk or actually the proactive ability to drive away the predator that you're going to have. And so the key for this project was to get teachers engaged, just like my students, in understanding how to manage risk and what can animals tell us. So I went to the conversation, which if you've never gone to, it's an incredibly good blog by scientists, and raised two questions. We may be safer now from the coronavirus than we were 3 months ago. This is May, but not totally safe. Would you get on an airplane? And the key is that you need metrics to test things. So what's going to be a critical variable? We talk about that. And these were the two metrics for each of these. And then I posed then the question for the end of the course for the teachers. Should schools reopen in the fall? If you've learned about managing risk, you're going to be asked to go back to school. Will you do it? Okay, it's about balancing trade-offs. And so the labs we did for both the students and the teachers were two. One is, what do squirrels have to tell us about managing risk? So the first is to flee or not to flee. What is a scared squirrel to do? If squirrels were always vigilant and ran from all disturbances, they would starve to death. So how does a clever squirrel reduce the risk of being eaten by still having time to sustain itself nutritionally? It has options. Choose habitats that are safer than others. It could also adjust the amount of time it is vigilant, keeping its head up, scanning for predators, or it could even adjust how close it lets a predator approach before it flees to not be always running away. Okay, and you could do 1, 2, or 3 of all of these, and the students had to design experiments to test this idea. The second one was less observational and more ecological, which is safety and sustenance. How do squirrels balance competing demands? Safety is a number one priority, but as the life dinner principle tells us, it is not the only priority, since animals must eat to sustain themselves from day to day. The life dinner principle suggests that while feeding is important, staying alive to feed another day is essential. The aim of this field exercise is to examine how squirrels balance these two competing demands by measuring giving up densities. And so this one is you put a bowl out with food in it, and you hide the food in sand or leaves or gravel or twigs. And the animal's going to have to work at it. And as it eats the food, it gets harder and harder to find the next one. At some point, it just gives up. So what factors might adjust the solution to balancing this trade-off between staying for another food item that's getting harder and harder to get, as opposed to just leaving and hoping to find another food item? So these were the two big labs. And the common theme to all of them is, I don't provide much more information than this. They have to take ownership of it. And what the field of squirrels is really a simple design that I give them, and then they have to design the experiments. Find some squirrels, approach them, drop a marker when they change their behavior. So like when they detect you, drop a marker, and then keep walking until it starts to run away and drop a marker. Note where the squirrel is, how far you were to start with, and pace out that difference, that distance. But the key is, this is the detection distance. How close were you before it changed its behavior? And then this is where it left and it ran away from you as you kept coming. So you've got a marker here and a marker here. You can measure this distance by pacing it out. You can measure this distance, and then you can compute the reaction distance, which is really the key to where it finally says, Uncle, I'm out of here. And with this simple design, you can ask questions like, is my backyard different from a park? Is a public central place in an urban center different from a rural or suburban park? Or is dawn and dusk different from daylight? Students can pose these questions, and they can do their own analysis using this basic design. And as far as the risk balancing squirrels go, again, the squirrel will come and approach your food tray or bowl where the food is hidden. It will then start to mine it, and at some point it gives up and runs away. And the logic is that over time, its gain rate goes down, and the assumption is that in the closed, risky habitat, it might be safer in the closed habitat than out in the open where the gain rate is slower. So these are the issues that they can go back to first principles. Is dawn and dusk different than daytime? Again, they frame and they take ownership of it. And they then do their presentations. So what did we learn? Going from the real to the virtual and back is hard. Do it step by step, building until the students own their own projects. Remember, one simple design can merge into many, many different investigations. So it's plural. Less is more. Provide them with some guidance, limit the chance to go awry by balancing investigation versus with a few constraints versus totally open-ended, and then let it rip. Topicality sets the hook. Risk in the time of pandemic is a great hook. And what I've also learned is separation, solo coming together democratizes science. It made everybody co-equals. The quiet student was as powerful as the talkative leader student. It democratized the science. Everybody felt that they were participating, and everyone felt their voice was being heard by the others. They self-organized using Slack. They had their own Zoom meetings. I was able to use the breakout rooms and visit them at standard times when I had them organized, where they would do some of the thinking and the talking so I could advise them. But my job was to stand back and let them act. I would often be Socratic and turn the question around to them by rephrasing it. So again, they took ownership and owned the labs. And so that's all I have to say. I hope we can have a nice discussion when you come back from the breakout rooms. You'll, again, unmute and ask your questions. If you'd like a copy of the presentation or a copy of the field exercises, you can write me at dir@princeton.edu. In the breakout rooms, how would you do less for more? And how would you stand back and let them act? That was a question you might think about. What are the key first principles or techniques required to introduce a field exercise? That's the reverse design. What are you trying to have them learn by doing as opposed to you teaching by talking? And how do you constrain the pattern of discovery so they don't go off the rails? You have a goal in mind. How do you limit where they can go? And then how do you expand the questioning? So limiting the detection, but opening the questioning to let them have ownership is absolutely critical. And again, with the rapporteur, we'll type your questions into the chat and we'll call on you as we go. Okay, so that's it for me. And I think we should now break out into breakout rooms.
Actually, first we have the
videos. I'm sorry. Yes, I need to find them. Hold on. I've got to get out of my, that's exactly right. Okay, here we go. Okay, before the questions go, we're going to have a video by Sean Nordell and Tom Vallone on field nature during the pandemic. Let's see if I can make this big. Can people see it?
Hi, I'm Sean Nordell.
And I'm Tom Vallone.
And we're
No, you're not sharing your screen.
Oh, okay. I'll go back. Okay. All right. I got to share the screen. Okay, hold on. Can you see it now?
Hi, I'm Sean Nordell.
And I'm Tom Vallone.
And we're here to talk about lessons learned while teaching animal behavior online during the pandemic.
We co-taught an animal behavior lecture and lab course recently.
Can everyone see it?
Hi, I'm Sean Nordell.
And I'm Tom Vallone.
And we're here to talk about lessons learned while teaching animal behavior online during the pandemic.
We co-taught an animal behavior lecture and lab course recently. And as I'm sure you're aware, there's teaching a Zoom class. You have a challenge with trying to have an active classroom with lots of discussion and engagement, building a community of learners. Teaching animal behavior is difficult online because students don't have access to animals to observe their behavior. So we took advantage of internet resources to sort of solve this problem, and also in a way that there could be small group activities and class discussion.
Well, one of the things we always want our students to do is be able to have great observation skills, and in particular, describing animal behavior is really a foundational skill. Students need to be able to describe animal behavior accurately and thoroughly, without inferring the intent of a behavior, such as saying, "Ooh, the squirrel up here is surprised," or without ascribing human emotions. So in other words, of course, not being anthropomorphic, such as talking about the angry birds.
So what we did was to take advantage of animal nature cams. There's lots on the web that focused on lots of different taxa from all over the world and all over the US. And they're available 24/7. So any time of the day or night, students can actually click on a webcam and observe the behavior of animals. We've actually found this is going to be useful going forward when we teach animal behavior in the future, because it's easier for students to observe animals on the computer than it is at a zoo or a city park where animals may not be doing anything.
And it turns out our students and ourselves were not the only ones watching nature cams during the pandemic. This became a big thing, and lots of people were doing it. And this also helped our students, because many of these nature cams have comment section, and there are devoted watchers, observers for each of these, who could, for instance, at nests, identify the males and females, and even help identify nestlings, which helped our students.
So what do we have students do? Well, one of the things we assigned was to have them construct an ethogram. And what we did for that was to assign a single video for the entire class. We provided students with an example of an ethogram, so they knew what it was, and then it was a description of behaviors that they would observe. Students could then observe the video, construct their own ethogram, and then we allowed students to review each other's ethogram, comment on it, discuss it, and then finalize it. And we had them sort of keep it down to a list of 5 to 10 behaviors, interesting behaviors that they would observe.
Then once they had that and had that skill, we asked them to continue those observations. That's something we often do, is throughout the semester, we want them to be exposed to more and more observations of animals. But what we had them do now is do it through nature cam. So they did a digital field notebook, 2 observations each week. We created Google Docs and folders, provided notebook examples, and created peer review groups where students could comment on what each other saw. And it created small communities where they could each comment on some of the cool things that they had seen or perhaps sometimes missed. You should have seen it at 3 o'clock, what I saw. And so they got a chance to talk to each other in small groups and form some nice communities. The other thing we did was we made sure that we gave them examples so that they knew exactly what it was we were looking for. And so this is an example of what we gave them for the digital field notebook. And I should say that all of the animal behavior assignments plus this, those are all available on a link there for Google Docs. So there's a folder with all our animal behavior assignments. So we hope this is helpful for you. I think animal cams are here for us to say for the long run. We want to thank you. As always, we say, go Cubs, and take good care.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, so now, as in the last discussion, rather than take questions now, we're going to go into the breakout rooms. And then we'll come back and have a general questions on my presentation and on the topics that I hope you'll discuss that I listed going forward. Looks like almost everyone's coming back. It's good. Okay, so our discussion is going to take us up to the lunch break, and then everyone can race around and grab a bite to eat and then come back. But we had a very lively discussion in my group, but I'm curious to see what you guys thought about teaching laboratories virtually, on how, if you've done it, what insights you've had, and if you haven't done it, how are you going to constrain discovery but open up questioning? How are you going to have the students take ownership of their own learning? Breakout group one, room one.
So we're breakout room one. We talked about mixed mobility for students and getting out to creatures, and we talked about using RC vehicles as a compensatory mechanism there for having a moving entity or moving, avatar of yourself if you are limited in movement. We talked about using videos of pets and of roommates' pets.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. When, our field course is both Princeton students and Columbia University students. You can imagine, with the outbreak in New York City being the epicenter in March and April, those students didn't even really want to go to Central Park.
Yeah.
And so I had to, on the fly, create lab exercises that I didn't talk about with respect to their cats and dogs. And so, since I work on stripes and zebras, we created one with pulling socks that are striped or not striped for cats. And for dogs, we were looking at cognition. Many people had more than one dog. And we did the shell game, hide the food item under shells, and figured out the cognition of the different breeds or whatever. So we came up with a bunch of exercises that worked in their apartments.
Nice. We talked about using videos from zoos, lists of zoos and other organizations that include these, like the National Zoo, San Diego Zoo, the Cornell Hawk Camera. We talked about people self-reporting on explanations of their pets' behaviors in a free-form way, not necessarily constrained for empirical words, if I understood correctly, and about fictional representations of animals and how that allows for analysis both of the behavior exhibited and the representation or portrayal or surrounding stimuli, like background music or lighting changes of the behavior exhibited, and how those, that allows for that 2 layers of analysis there. Those are the things we talked about.
Good. I think the virtual bits you're talking about are really interesting. One of the things I toyed with doing, but I didn't do it, is the new Lion King. Because that's all done with 3D posture analysis, very, very high tech technology, and compare it to the cartoon Lion King, okay, and see the difference, okay, in what human perception of how to make an organism more real than a cartoon. It's an interesting exploration idea that would lead to some really fascinating discussion.
Yeah, that really is.
And you could just get the 2 trailers for free, probably, and you don't have to have the whole movie.
Yeah, and that includes practically shot-for-shot comparisons.
Exactly.
Nice.
Okay, how about group 2, room 2?
That was us.
That's right, it was us.
So, including you, yes. And so one of the things that Dan shared with us was a link where not only could we watch Boring Zebra, but I guess we could watch Boring Impalas. I'm not sure. You didn't say they were boring, but
they're hippos. We have a live hippo cam at a site called impalalive.org, MPALALIVE, one word, .org, and it'll feature the impalas, but the people on the screen, there's cameras all around the Impala Research Center, they might cut to Grevy zebra, they might cut to the fish eagle, which is like our bald eagle. You never know what you're going to get. But when they're not doing anything, it's just on the hippos, sunbathing or making noises and moving in the water and things like that.
So anyways, that sounded interesting to me. I'm going to go check that out tonight or tomorrow. I know what I'm doing this weekend, following up on some of these links. And then different people talked about what they were doing, what they had done in their behavior courses or what they planned to do. So another thing that Dan had said was that when watching large animals, so the example was, again, the zebra video, that you could do focal or scan sampling. And if you scan sample for large animals, I guess the rule of thumb or general rule of thumb is that about 3 minutes.
3 minutes
is
between the scans will give you the potential for an intervening behavior. So that makes them statistically independent. You can compare that to the focal animal and talk about the pros and cons of either sampling scheme.
And I thought that was a good idea because my students really like, in the past, they've really liked to use scan sampling, and I prefer they'd use focal sampling a little more in the activities that we do after they learn about sampling.
Right. I mean, there's, yeah, and you know, there's no, depends on the species, right? So it's a great discussion point about how being objective is not universal. It's tuned to the context.
So I'd say that's about, I mean, that's mainly what we talked about.
Yep. Okay, breakout room 3. Anybody from breakout room 3 with us? I don't see the hands up, so I can't see any hands up on my screen. So if
I'll hop in then. Yeah, Laura, I can see that your hand's up.
Okay, I was reporting for group 8. So we talked about the challenges and some ideas for kind of teaching students how to collect data on animal behavior. So some of the challenges our group found were like just the amount of time you're asking students to invest outside of class. That works for some groups and not for others. And the pandemic makes it difficult for certain students to get out, like we talked about. If we're sharing videos with them, sometimes they don't have the bandwidth, internet bandwidth to actually get access to those videos. And if we're using like cams, that the animals that they happen to watch might not be very representative, but that's always a problem. The ideas that people had were really great. So one of our group members used footage she had from her own data collection and had students help analyze those data. So it was a great experience for them, and it helped to further her own research. One of the members asked students to each find videos on YouTube of the same behavior. So they were finding different videos, but of lion-hyena interactions, and then they were collecting data on those interactions.
That's good. Cool. Yeah, that's clever. Yeah, go for a particular behavior across species or across content.
Yeah, it was neat.
Clever way to do it.
Yeah,
I quantify it in a chi-squared sense of looking at context when they come up with some hypotheses. That's actually a very ingenious idea.
It was a really great idea. Yeah. I was considering for my students in the US to actually send them earwigs. We had this module that we presented at one of the workshops about earwig parental care. And since they're not a pest, I think we can send them throughout the US. And there's a lot of great exercise around there. And then some of our group members were talking about online data mining sites. So like Data Dryad, Figshare, and MoveBank. And I'll just post these in the chat. That each have different types of data about animal behavior that might be useful to people.
That's cool. Your bandwidth problem that you mentioned about not everyone's going to be able to look at the high resolution images. I deliberately chose low resolution videos for that reason, because you often say high definition. Well, I always go for the low definition because that's the bandwidth. But one of the suggestions was from group 4 is let the students take them on their phones and swap them. they'll be by definition low definition. And that's a good way to, again, democratize, because everyone is then bragging about my backyard is really cool. Well, my backyard is cooler, right? And so you start to, and the thing about backyards is when I was looking at everyone and talked about it, everyone kept saying, but your backyard has too many trees. Mine doesn't have any trees. So that was how they started to generate the hypotheses about the drivers for the different patterns. That's where their why questions came from, as they looked at each other's images online, because I had them all go outside to show us their squirrel ariums, and that led to a great discussion. So sharing videos is a good way to do that too.
Okay, looking at other hands here, I see Miranda, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was from group 9, and we talked about a lot of different things, but thinking about sort of how do we give our students ownership of their projects and, you know, allowing them to do projects they can actually do. Sometimes we want to sort of create an assignment and send it to students and hope that they can maybe find what that assignment tells them to do. But instead of asking students, what animals could you observe? What sorts of things could you document? So that way they have, you know, more equal opportunity to see what's available for them. Animals are everywhere, but, you know, even squirrels, maybe not everyone can find a squirrel, but perhaps they can more easily see deer, and kind of letting them figure it out on their own, because even if they're not doing a great job, they're still learning from what sorts of behaviors they're taking down. We also discussed using the animal cams to have the students do some sort of science communication. One of our group mates had students create a children's book about animal behavior based on the webcams and the data that they had collected from that. And I thought that was super interesting, especially because science communication is so important. And in upper level classes, we often emphasize that, but in such a way that they're presenting their science to other scientists. In this case, they would be presenting what they found to, you know, children or, you know, just the public. And
that's a good idea. There's a site called Loom, Loom. And for our conservation clubs, which are middle school kids in Kenya, we have a series of really important books like Wangari Maathai and Planting Trees. And you can get those free online, and you can get a lot of things free online, and it turns the pages for you. And you're in the corner leading discussion or reading it. And so it becomes a teaching tool your students could take a behavior and make a narrative and share with the class, and you'd archive them all. So that's a really good idea. But Loom is a really nice platform for that. Good idea.
Okay, Christine, your hand's up.
Hello, I think I was in group 4. One of my group members already posted a link in the chat to one of the things we talked about.
That was a good one.
Yeah, the window swap. So we spent a lot of our time talking about just a variety of different resources that are available. Someone else already mentioned the idea of someone having raw data from an existing project, like camera trap video, including unsorted data, which we talked a little bit about, how students may not be very familiar with that the angle of the camera matters a lot, or if you have aerial versus ground footage, or that there's different problems that you can encounter with the data collection process, so that giving them a sample of raw data and asking them how they would approach it can be helpful. But we also talked about how that can be really overwhelming and difficult if they've never done something like that before, so that having them collect their own data is also helpful, and teaches us sort of a different skill set.
If you do that, as you said, it could be overwhelming. It's definitely challenging, but you could do that towards the end of the course, after they've already looked at videos and done time budgets and done some experiments by doing their own observations. Then they'll be able to say, well, camera traps are not as good as me walking around. Aha, what does that mean? But you walking around does what? You interfere with the animal. So there's a great set of discussions there. And then you could bring up the points about it only happens when they trigger it, unless it's on a programmed video, and that's a very different type of sampling. So you're getting at the whole point of sampling, which is really, really important, especially in an animal behavior class, for an advanced one especially. So I think camera traps can be used in an effective way like that.
The one other question that we kind of talked about, but didn't get enough time to really try to answer, was the challenge of, like what you were speaking about, is a field class, a lot of students that are probably mostly very motivated already, and many of them are probably relatively proactive, and how some of these activities will work well for proactive students, but that the students who are less proactive or have less experience, or they're in a lower level class where you're just trying to start to introduce the topics, it's harder remotely to get them to even, like, they don't know how to ask questions yet, and it may be difficult to find the students that are struggling to locate a perspective. So
I was working with high school teachers, and they had never done anything in animal behavior before.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and so I had to come up with some background to catch them up. So the Life Dinner Principle, I gave them the Krebs and Dawkins article, but I also gave them a link to Wikipedia to catch them up on the first principle. So again, reverse design, I decided that we would talk about trade-offs, and we talk about, because that's what they're going to need to know, and their students are going to need to know in the classroom under the pandemic. And I try to guide their learning to some focused things and gave them the background. So you're absolutely right, but don't throw your hands up and say they're not going to know anything. It's your job to pick the few things you want them to do and then motivate them along. And the more successes they have as they own it, and they realize animal behavior is compelling, engaging, and they can do it, then they will get more and more active. So my sense is that even the least active, when becoming part of a team where people say, so what'd you see? What'd you learn? Normally in a group, they just would blow it off and they wouldn't do it. But when they had to do something to share it as a co-equal, they actually did it. And this was during the summer, and it was 2/3 women and 1/3 men. Their partners and husbands had to take care of the kids while they did the projects, right? And so that gave them a freedom to be scholars again, to be learners, and that they really rose to that occasion.
Okay, Dan, we don't have any more hands up, but we're also right at time to
right
take.
At time, yeah. Excellent, everybody. This has been really terrific. Thank you very much for listening and for chiming in with some great ideas. I hope you've been writing them down. Someone said you can copy your own chat. You can, and I presume it's going to also be copied by ABS. But under that little file function, it'll ask you if you want to save the chat, and you can do that yourselves, and you'll get a printout of it later. Okay, I'll give you all the links. There's been some great links put up as well for people to go visit afterwards. So everyone, go have a nice lunch break, and I gather we're going to come back at 1 o'clock for the afternoon session, and we'll pick up with Eduardo at that point. Okay?
Yep, 40 minutes. We'll see you then.
Okay, bye, everyone.
I mentioned as well that we have a couple links that I just wanted to share of resources put together by ABS members. So one of these links takes you to a list of stuff that's already been put together, and the second link is how you can submit your own resources. So these are either things that you've created or that you found online that you think would be helpful. And we've mentioned so many already, so I think it'd be really helpful if some of us try to put some of those
We
in
can
there.
pull them together. Yeah, good idea, Andrea. Good.
And that's where we'll put some of our resources that we've been talking about. How we said we'll put them online after the workshop. We'll put them in these locations.
Yeah. So look forward to that. And this whole thing is going to be recorded, and so you'll have a chance for it. And again, if you want any of our talks, just write to us, and we'll send them to you. And I'll send a number of people want the Squirrel Labs. I'm happy to send them out. Okay.
Have a great lunch, breakfast, dinner, wherever you're at.
Bye-bye.
You after lunch. So my name is Eduardo Bessa, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Brasilia in Brazil. I'm gonna show you some digital resources that I have used in the past semester, and how I thought about them, how to choose them. And so the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about choosing digital resources is that the internet very much resembles an amusement park like this. So there's all these cool stuff out there that really catches our attention, and we're like, oh, nice media workshop. I'm gonna try this, and I'm gonna try that one too. I'm gonna pick this one, and well, there will always be something for you to grab and apply to your classroom. The internet is this amusement park, and you have no idea where to begin from. So I'm gonna bring that back on. Is Dan said, reverse design. Put your aims first. What do you want your students to do? What do you want them to accomplish? What do you want for them after your discipline is over? So put your aims first. And well, Andrea has just shown us that there is this education committee open file that you can put together different things that you find interesting. Perhaps put stuck those things that you have found that look interesting somewhere. Just keep track of them so that you can go back to them and try later, or try in a different moment. Don't lose them. It's very easy to lose them again too. So I brought this from University of Houston. They have this very nice Web 3.0 tools for teaching online, and they have this list of possible aims that you may want to use in your discipline. These are the aims that they list. I used more or less these aims for my class last semester. So which ones did I choose? My targeted abilities were creativity and clarity. I teach in a university, a course that forms school teachers. So I'm mostly interested in making them more didactic, more clear as they talk. And I also wanted to develop their creativity, make them think outside the boxes. Further, I wanted them to collaborate mostly with society. So I want them to use citizen science projects to develop their own knowledge of animal behavior, and their inquisitiveness, their capacity of posing questions. And finally, I wanted them to be proactive and like own their learning, as Dan has posed before, and think scientifically. For that, we use the virtual lab, and I'm just going to show you some of the results out of these three objectives. But before that, one thing that really popped up every now and then during this morning is to define how much is enough. So it's really hard when you're not with your students to define how long a task may take. And if you're in the classroom, you can see the progress, but online it's really hard to follow the progress. So sometimes what you thought would be the completion time takes much more than that. And further, apart from that, there are other disciplines that have a high workload that they may be struggling with. And again, something that has appeared every now and then this morning, the hardware limitations. Sometimes you have this great idea that works fine with even a cell phone, and then you realize most students have like Android cell phones instead of iOS ones, Apple ones, and it just won't work as you expected. So be aware of how much is enough for your students. So the first project aiming at their creativity and clarity, I use this. I'm just going to move these windows to the side. Okay. I asked my students to create an exhibit. For that, I used Art Steps. Art Steps is this digital resource, this online digital resource. You don't have to download anything, and you can create sort of a museum exhibit with any sort of content. Of course, I could create my own presentation, and instead of giving a lecture or something like that, I would guide them through the presentation. It's one way of using ArtSteps, but what I did in my case was to use it as an assessment. I wanted them to create interesting exhibits, and I wanted them to write creative subtitles or texts to present each piece in their museum. So my criteria of evaluation was the richness of information, the quality of the images they used. Another very important thing for us was that the exhibit was open, online open. So it really motivates them to work harder on that, so they own more, as Dan was asking this morning. They own their learning more. And but I needed all the material there to be Creative Commons, so this was another criteria of evaluation. And we had, since it was open for visiting by others, I added extra points for visualization of the exhibits. So this is, Laura was mentioning before, Year Weeks. We had this very nice exhibit on Year Week, parental care and sexual selection. You have the pictures here. You can walk through. You have a guided tour that you can walk around with specific stop points and texts that are read online. They have this audio presentation while you're walking the exhibit. And if you don't want to use ArtSteps, there are Const Matrix that does much the same. And you can even create an PowerPoint exhibit to. My second aim was to promote collaboration with society and inquisitiveness. For that, we used citizen science initiatives like iNaturalist, FishBase. Someone posted one this morning that we used. Can't remember that. Wikiavis, which is a Brazilian site on birds. Even YouTube. So I asked them to describe behavior and raise questions. Their tasks were to pose questions, design a project with a specific methodology, and collect and analyze the data. So just for as an example, they had this idea of checking what kind of diver behavior elicited aversive behavior in whale sharks. So they watched these hundreds of videos on YouTube of homemade videos of whale sharks, and recorded every register that seemed to them as an aversive behavior. And they had to present that afterwards in a poster session. And we have different projects like with FishBase, we had a camouflage seahorse camouflage project, so which kind of habitat they prefer according to their camouflage. So that's more or less what we did. And finally, with proactivity and scientific thinking, we wanted the students to have more control on what would be sort of a lab design. So we used the Mealworm Virtual Lab. It's a very nice virtual lab. You have the mealworms in a petri dish and a few stimuli that you can apply to the mealworms, and you have to first predict what will be the response, and afterwards the response, you watch the response, and you have to try and define what response really came out. Sometimes it's a little hard for the students to imagine what the mealworm's doing, but the idea was that. So this is the virtual lab. The only sad part is that I have just learned that I won't be able to use that next semester because of the flash animation they use. I won't be able to use it anymore. So well, once you have used it, it's really nice to have that PDCA cycle of plan, do, check, act. The idea is to plan according to your aim. So the reverse design again. Apply everything to your class and then check, but specifically it's really important to check with your students how much they enjoyed, how much they learned, because it's really easy for us to check with ourselves or between the teacher and teacher assistant. No, I think the idea was really good. The students really caught what we wanted to do. But if we don't give them the opportunity of talking and assessing the application of the digital resource, sometimes it doesn't really come out as we imagine it should or we thought it had. And finally, act on the necessary changes for the following semester to try again with a different approach if necessary. So what else? I intended to give you some ideas of where to find nice digital resources, but I think all of us have many good ideas, and I want to use this in the breakout rooms. But keep in mind that many textbooks have very nice sites with online resources, especially now the publishers are really working hard to make online and digital resources to make available to the students and professors around. Second, we have the abs.com page with profiles with the online resources we have already listed. Now we are trying, we're thinking about a project on different animal behaviorists profiles to be posted online to give us an idea of what different people are there working on animal behavior. Also, faculty and laboratory, animal behavior laboratories around the world have very nice resources on their web pages, so keep an eye for those. And if you have good ideas, please make them available in your personal web pages. And finally, keep an eye for Laboratory and Field Exercises new edition. This is a very classical book that Education Committee have been putting in an effort on producing a new edition that's supposed to come out in a year. So it still takes a while before we can have it, but don't forget about it. And well, the main ideas here were just to make sure you decide what your aim for the subject is first, and then you decide what online tools you want to use. Avoid overwhelming your students, so think how much they can deal with. And plan, do, check, act. Plan what you want to do. Do it, check with your students, and then act on the necessary changes. Thank you. I would like to thank the opportunity, and make sure you post any questions during the videos we're going to watch now. But also, if you want to write and ask for any material that I have spoken about, just send me an email. Sometimes some material has the language problem that most of what I have is in Portuguese. But if you need something, we can happily talk about it. And now we're going to see two contributed videos, one by Brian Greco, showing how he used Gmod, a video game, to teach operational conditioning in the University of Wisconsin. And actually, I reckon this is the first one, Slack, the use of Slack for collaboration.
You need to let me share the screen. For some reason, I'm no longer co-host.
Oh, no problem. I will allow you in a second. So the one on Slack collaboration by Felicity Youth from the University of Texas. I'm just going to stop sharing here.
Okay, here we go.
Hi, my name is Felicity Muth, and I thought I would share some information on using Slack for teaching animal behavior online. So I'm at the University of Texas at Austin. I've got a Bumblebee Cognition Lab. And last semester I taught Principles of Animal Behavior, which was a class for juniors and seniors at around 60 to 65 students. And it consisted of lectures, discussion groups, and a group research project. My general structure of my course was that I had pre-recorded lectures that students watched in their own time, and then were encouraged to discuss the lecture material via the online discussion using Slack. We then had weekly discussions with the teaching assistant where they talked through these animal behavior projects they did. And I did a weekly interactive lecture which kind of used active learning techniques to draw upon the knowledge in the lectures that they should have watched in their own time. And I had all this laid out in the syllabus, and if anybody would like to see my syllabus, I'm really happy to share it. Okay, so Slack, I'm just going to go over what it is, why I found it helpful to use for the class, and specifically how to incentivize students to use it. Because talking to other professors, a common problem I've heard is that people will introduce some kind of messaging system, but students just won't participate. Okay, so the way that Slack works is basically a messaging discussion board type system that you can either download to your phone or you can download an app for your computer. This is what my one looks like. So each of these icons indicates a different workspace. This is the one that I have used for my lab. This one is one that a lot of people might be interested in. It's a Slack group for people who teach animal behavior or behavioral ecology, where we discuss topics related to teaching. This is the one that I use for my class. And so then within this workspace, I can have a number of what's called channels. So for example, we have general class chat, questions to do with the course, questions to do with lectures, stuff to do with their group projects. And what I really like about Slack is that it gets students to engage with each other in a kind of organized way. So students are probably always going to make some kind of messaging set up for a class. Most commonly, they seem to use GroupMe right now, whereas this is a way that it can be kind of organized, and I can step in and to some degree control the information to try and get them more accurate information. And so the way that it works, I've blanked out students' names, but here that they can ask questions relating to the course. And the nice thing is that they answer each other's questions. So I had far fewer emails using this system because they would just answer each other's questions. And I also have to say there's nothing more satisfying than seeing one student tell another student that their question is in the syllabus. Then how do I incentivize students to use it? Because, for example, last year I tried to incentivize students to use the Canvas discussion boards, and one of the students told me that they were embarrassed for me that I even suggested this as an option. Okay, so the first thing that I did was I gave students a point at the beginning of the semester for introducing themselves on Slack and giving me an animal behavior fact. And of course, all the students got this point, and the purpose of this was just to get them to download Slack, work out how to use it, and to kind of get over that initial hurdle of just using it, basically. And then I told them this was going to be the only place that I would give them information relating to the course, so stuff like deadlines. I didn't send them any emails. I didn't message them at all via Canvas. All of it was in here. So if they wanted to get up-to-date information, they had to use Slack. And I think that often students just get bombarded with too much information. People will cross-post in too many different places. And so I really just had all the information going to this single place. And we also very much structure the course around it. So for example, when they're working on their group projects, we had 12 groups, I think, consisting of 5 students per group. And they each had their own channel where they could chat to each other about their ongoing project. But the TA could also step in and help them, for example, with their analysis or whatever questions they had, all via Slack. And so, yeah, just to finish by saying, if anybody has any more questions, I'd be really happy to answer them. At least personally, I found this a really useful tool and something that I will use in future years. All right, thank you.
Terrific. And I think Felicity is with us to talk to us later in more detail.